Welcome to Viewmaster Travels. I'm Dave, on a mission to visit every location from my vintage Viewmaster reels. Today I'm looking at a reel that captures a slice of the future from 1962, the Seattle World's Fair. Sawyer's Viewmaster was very connected to World's Fairs. They first released their product at the New York World's Fair in 1940, and they documented over 10 different World's Fairs. Was the fair a vision of tomorrow or a relic of its time? Let's find out. If you have any memories of visiting a World's Fair, I'd love to hear about them. Leave them in the comments below. There'd already been one World's Fair in Seattle in 1909, the Alaska-Yukon-Pacific Exposition, marking the 10th anniversary of the Klondike Gold Rush. Fast forward to 1955, as the 50th anniversary of that fair approached, Mayor Alan Pomeroy convinced the city council to put on another fair. The theme was going to be a festival of the American West, celebrating local history. But all that changed on October 4th, 1957, when a robotic beep suddenly echoed from space.
CBS Television presents a special report on Sputnik 1, the Soviet space satellite. Douglas Edwards reporting.
Until 2 days ago, that sound had never been heard on this earth. Suddenly, it has become as much a part of 20th century life as the whir of your vacuum cleaner. It's a report from man's farthest frontier.
Dr. Franklin, can you tell us where the Sputnik is now and how it's moving?
Right now it's north of Auckland, New Zealand, and moving southeast. It will be, in 10 minutes, about 1,500 miles north of Little America, and in about 24 minutes...
If the Soviets could fly something over America with impunity, could they drop a nuclear bomb anywhere they wanted? Suddenly, everyone was interested in science and the space race, and the Seattle World's Fair theme changed overnight to living in the space age. The US government was very willing to fund anything promoting science and technology, and the Fair Committee was very willing to take their money, so with the new space age design theme crafted to present America's uncertain future as safe and optimistic, the fair opened on April 21st, 1962. The fair's location was a mile north of downtown Seattle. The city had purchased and raised 74 acres of the Queen Anne neighborhood, locally called the Warren Avenue Slum, and their plan was to use the fair buildings for the city after the fair was over, so I was hoping a lot of what's in these pictures was still there. The fairground area is now called the Seattle Center, so we went there, looking for this place, the fair's original information booth. I found an original map of the fair and lined it up with a current map of Seattle Center. Here's where the info booth was, and today that'd be just here, next to the Children's Theater building. From there, the Space Needle's an obvious landmark, and we found our first Viewmaster destination. Space Needle and Information Center. Aside from the Space Needle, things look completely different today. The first thing I noticed were how many more trees there are today. Turns out they'd planted 20,000 new trees during and after the fair, and it seems they've really grown in. The Information Center was sponsored by the General Insurance Company of America and staffed by 10 young ladies dressed in yellow blouses and brown skirts, who'd answer questions and sell guidebooks. These are some of the original guidebooks from the fair. You know, as much as the fair took place in '62, its design really reflected ideas from the '50s, a time when the nuclear arms race was on everyone's mind. And what I've always found interesting is Viewmaster's own images from a visit to Cape Canaveral in 1959, where 2/3 of the things shown to visitors were intercontinental ballistic missiles. Truth is, all this military might on display made the public more worried about the future, not less, and I think the government intentionally decided to rebrand the arms race as the space race, embracing space-age design and themes to convince everyone that their future would be amazing.
I am honored to open the Seattle World Fair today. What we show is achieved with great effort in the fields of science, technology, and industry. These accomplishments are a bridge which carry us confidently towards the 21st century.
The World's Fair was not just an opportunity to show off America's strength in science and technology, it was a way to convince the public that the future could be safe, exciting, and prosperous, and the building's architecture tried to do just that. Here's one example. This was called Space Gothic and was our next target. Space Gothic Arches of the U.S. Science Pavilion. These arches are still there. They are part of the Pacific Science Center, today a science museum. During the fair, it was the United States Science Exhibit, described as a cathedral of science. The exhibit became a museum immediately after the fair ended, and it's still open today, looking pretty much the same. A visit to the Science Center began with a 10-minute film called The House of Science, and after that you'd see exhibits on modern discoveries like atoms, cosmic rays, nuclear fusion, and DNA. There was a significant area for kids and a giant domed theater called the Spacarium, which took 750 spectators on a journey through the universe. After the fair ended, the Pacific Science Center Foundation paid $1 a year for a lease to the building and turned the fair's science exhibits into a museum. Today, the House of Science is an IMAX theater, the Spacarium is a laser dome, and the Junior Lab is the Tinker Tank Makerspace. The museum is a very popular tourist attraction in Seattle, and the architecture outside really reflects the original space-age theme. Right next door, though, is something that became so synonymous with Seattle that I didn't know it was built as a space-age icon of the World's Fair. Space Needle from U.S. Science Pavilion. The Space Needle, like the Eiffel Tower, has become an icon of its home city, and both the Needle and the Eiffel Tower were built for World's Fairs and used extensively in their advertising. Eddie Carlson doodled his idea for the Space Needle on a napkin in 1959 after visiting the cafe at the top of the radio tower in Stuttgart. Carlson was the chair of the Seattle World's Fair Committee and decided his fair needed a similar icon. Carlson couldn't get state or local funding to build the Needle, though, so he raised the funds from local business owners, which meant the attraction, while part of the fair, was privately owned, and it's still run as a private enterprise today. What's amazing is that the whole thing was built in 400 days, and the restaurant at the top opened a month before the fair began. The construction techniques were innovative and record-breaking, and the rotating restaurant was so revolutionary that the designer patented it. The Space Needle reminds me of another famous 1962 home, the Jetsons' Skypad apartment building. Turns out Iwao Takemoto, a layout and design artist for the Jetsons, told the New York Times in 2005 that the Space Needle did inspire the cartoon's space-age designs. The Space Needle joined a prestigious list of World's Fair iconic structures, and it's definitely open to the public today. So we bought our ticket and took the ride to the top to find our next Viewmaster destination. Looking down from Eye of the Needle restaurant. The Viewmaster view from the top of the Needle shows the Washington State Coliseum, which looks unchanged today, although only the roof is original. Today it's the Climate Pledge Arena. During the fair, this was the State Flag Plaza, surrounded by the boulevards of the world, kind of an international-themed shopping area. This three-sided building is still there today. That was the Japan, Mexico, Canada, and Denmark pavilions. The rotating observation deck gives fantastic views of Seattle, including straight down through the glass floor. The restaurant at the top was the Eye of the Needle, and lunch cost you $5. It closed in 2017, and today there's an exotic cocktail bar there instead. Back on the ground, the Coliseum contained the World of Century 21 exhibit. The theme was a mix of optimism and warning. Century 21, the threshold and the threat. You and 99 other guests would enter via a giant bubble-shaped elevator which ascended into an array of aluminum cubes. You'd then walk through a presentation of what your future would be like, including monorails, self-driving air cars, and your own personal gyrocopter to take to work. There would be micro-mail communication, whatever that is, electronic universities, and your home's furniture would be made from plastic and paper. As optimistic as the future was, the tour ended with a 1962 family hiding in their fallout shelter, a grim reminder of everyone's underlying fears. Reading the guidebook, this one building alone had so many exhibits it's impossible to cover them all here, but I did find one interesting modern connection. The bubble elevator was called the Bubbleator, and it was used in the food court after the fair ended, where it was decorated as a pumpkin for Halloween or snow globe for Christmas. It was finally retired in 1980. Eventually, a man named Gene Oxiger found it in a warehouse and put it in his backyard as a greenhouse, where you can still see it today. Right outside the Coliseum is our next Viewmaster destination. International Fountain changes form and color. This fountain looks much the same today as it did during the fair, but it's actually been entirely redesigned. The original fountain was the result of an international design contest. 261 designs were submitted, and 2 architects from Tokyo won. Their design put the emphasis upon the water itself without any recourse to sculpture or accessories. The parabolic water jets were controlled by electronic tape or improvised on a manual keyboard, coordinated with colored lights. It was redesigned in 1995, keeping the idea, but removing the sharp moon rocks and pointy water jets so that people could play in the spray. Just past the fountain was one of 3 Houses of the Future, the Home of Living Light for Tomorrow, which was made entirely out of plywood and was sponsored by the Douglas Fir Plywood Association. After the fair, it was shipped to Olympia, where it served as a restaurant, until it burned down in 2002. Looking through the brochure for this plywood house, it hit me. Most of the future on display at the fair was just stuff the sponsors wanted to sell you. I guess predictions about the world of tomorrow always end up reflecting the trends and values of their time, and the Seattle World's Fair was no exception. I think this image from the Viewmaster reel, Backstage USA on Show Street, which always stood out to me as odd, exemplifies that. Show Street was this entire section, described as the adult entertainment section of the fair, originally called Sin Alley. It was added due to concerns that the fair might be too science-y. Attractions included Paradise International, featuring the world's most beautiful girls, Backstage USA, where patrons could glimpse into the dressing rooms of performers, and Les Poupées de Paris, a naughty puppet show put on by Sid and Marty Krofft. The attitudes at the Space Age Fair were strongly rooted in the past. It would be the next decade that would see real cultural changes, although some exhibits really did hint at the future. Audio-visual exhibit in the Bell System Pavilion.
Thank you. Hi, this is the Bell System's new touch-tone dialing. Let's try it. Okay, I'll race you. Ready? Go. I beat you.
The Bell Laboratories exhibit demonstrated telephony that we take entirely for granted today, including a newfangled touch-tone phone which replaced the rotary dial phone and would enable inter-device communication techniques that would lead to the internet. Other technologies debuting at the fair were telecommunication satellites, digital libraries on computer, and automated remote control home appliances. But the fair's biggest contribution to the future may have literally been the construction of the fair itself. The space-age design theme forced builders to perfect many new techniques. For example, building the Space Needle was no small feat. They used 2,820 cubic yards of concrete, the largest concrete pour in the history of Seattle. The Coliseum roof created 4 acres of unobstructed space using pre-stressed concrete tripods, and those delicate space Gothic arches were 11,000 tons of precast concrete, the largest building project of its type at the time. 4-car monorail trains travel high above traffic. Another lasting contribution to Seattle was the monorail, built by Allweg, who'd built the monorail at Disneyland, to transfer visitors from downtown into the fair. It was the first full-scale public transit monorail in the world. Touted as the absolute final solution to the future's travel problems, the monorail never really did gain traction, even in Seattle where the planned post-fair expansions never materialized. During the fair, though, it was extremely popular. 7.3 million people rode it in the 6 months of the fair, generating $5.5 million in revenue. Riding it from downtown to Seattle Center today, you go between the amazing pop culture museum buildings. But during the fair, you'd pass above the Gayway, the fair's space-oriented spectacular amusement zone. These were carnival rides, all slightly future-themed, and I was curious what this one was in the Viewmaster picture. Looking at my old map, this was the Sky Ride, a cable car ride built by the Swiss company Von Roll, whose first US installation was the Skyway in Disneyland. It took you across the entire fairground to the world of commerce and industry. And after the fair, the Gayway was rebranded as the Fun Forest, partly because of all the trees that had been planted there, which remained until 2009 and was replaced by the Chihuly Glass Museum. The Sky Ride ran until 1982, when it was moved to the Washington State Fairgrounds, where it's still running today. For our last Viewmaster destination, we had to leave the old fairgrounds and follow the monorail track on foot to find monorail speeds from Seattle to Fair in just 99 seconds. The monorail runs along 5th Avenue, so we walked until we saw this distinctive building, which is the Devonshire apartment building built in 1925. We stood on the corner waiting for the monorail to come along. Unfortunately, they only run one train anymore, and it was on the far track. Today, the downtown station is in the Westlake shopping mall, but during the fair, the track ran further to what is now Westlake Park, to a station built right over Pine Street. After the fair ended, the monorail was sold to the city. They moved the station into the mall in the 80s. Today, it's the only all-weg monorail still in operation with its original cars, and we rode it back to the fair. October 21st, 1962 was the final day of the fair, and John F. Kennedy was scheduled to attend the final day and close the show. However, he canceled his visit due to what he claimed to be a bad cold, although the real reason for his cancellation became clear the day after the fair ended.
On October 22nd, 1962, President John F. Kennedy broadcast a special message to the nation from his office in the White House. Here is President Kennedy as he delivered that message, bearing on recent events in Cuba.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases...
The Space Age Fair had begun with Sputnik, and it ended with the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world of tomorrow vision of families cowering in fallout shelters suddenly seemed a plausible future. I think the issue with the kind of space-age optimism shown at the fair is that as time passes, people tend to feel betrayed. It's the "where's my jetpack" problem. Corporate sponsors showing off science fiction ideas to people so they'll buy the latest microwave oven. It just leaves a sense of disillusionment as the actual future unfolds. Looking up at the Space Needle, it's clear their vision of tomorrow is still inspiring today. What do you think? Was the fair a beacon of hope or just corporate daydreaming? Let me know in the comments. Either way, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching.